We'll do that. So Prashant, just in case this cuts off again, this is being very unpredictable these days. Zoom, some days it is allowing me to continue, some days it is just cutting off. Okay, so let's start off. I hope you don't mind.
Yes,
Hmm?
sir.
Every minute counts when if it's going to cut me off in 40 minutes or something. Okay, we're talking about the state of nature in Locke, and I told you, unlike in Hobbes, where the state of nature is a war of all against all, where everybody is fighting with everyone, and it is pre-social, which means there is no society in this state of nature as Hobbes saw it. But in Locke, what we see is a completely different picture. Okay, the state of nature in Locke is a state of harmony. People are living in a social setting. It is not pre-social. It might be a state of nature, but nevertheless, he says it is a social state of nature. And he believes, or rather, he says, everything in nature belongs to everyone equally. Okay. So he says it's not like some people are entitled to more things and some people are entitled to less things. No, everything that exists in nature belongs to everyone equally. This is what he says. Then Locke goes on to claim that all human beings are equal in the sense that every human being has been endowed with rationality. Okay, there is no human being who does not have rationality. So, since all human beings are rational, he says all human beings are equal. So far, fine. But here is where he puts a small twist in the tale, which is he claims all are endowed with rationality, but not all are endowed with the same amount of rationality. Okay? They are not endowed with the same amount of rationality. Some are more rational than others. Okay, so I don't know if you read this book called The Animal Farm. I think everyone should read this book. Okay, uh, it's by George Orwell, Orwell. The Animal Farm, Orwell calls it a fairy tale, but it is actually aimed at the disillusionment with communism. Okay, when the Bolshevik Revolution took place in the USSR, then people were very hopeful that a more equitable society would come into being. And Lenin, when he was alive, he was striving to do exactly that. But unfortunately, Lenin died very early after the revolution. And he was succeeded by Joseph Stalin. Stalin was a dictator, hate monger, and just because Leon Trotsky opposed him, he chased him right into Argentina and got him killed there. Okay, so that kind of vindictive behavior and the establishment of a totalitarian regime in the name of communism, disillusioned a lot of people who were hopeful that communism would usher in a new era. So this is called a dystopia, dystopia. Dystopia is a utopia gone wrong. Utopia is one of the best things that can happen to you. But a dystopia is when what was supposed to be a utopia becomes something else, something undesirable. So, in that, you will find that first they say that all animals are equal. The animals, the very brief story, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, just this part. They drive out their human owner and say, we'll run this farm ourselves. The animals say, we will run this farm ourselves. Okay, and then they have some kind of 10 commandments in which one of the first commandment is all animals are equal. Okay, but after some time, when the pigs take control of the animal farm, pigs are symbolic of greed. Okay, and these change things into, they change the commandment into all animals are equal, but some are more equal. Okay, that means the pigs are more equal. That's a capitalist principle. So the dystopia begins there, that, you say you're creating a capitalist society, but in reality, what you're doing is, I mean, you're saying that you're going to create a communist society, but ultimately you end up with the same principles of capitalism, which is all people are equal, that they have rationality, but some are more rational than the others. All are not equally rational. Locke says those who have greater amount of rationality can be seen from the property that they have accumulated. Now, if you have laid down a principle where you say some people are more rational than the others, okay, the question that comes up is, how do you know who is more rational? How do you know who is a little less rational? So, so Locke has this simple criterion, which is the property criterion. I told you in the beginning itself, Locke's philosophy has to be seen not only as individualist, but it also has to be seen as a defense of private property. Okay, Locke is a strong supporter of private property. All right, so he believes that those people who have accumulated more property are those who are more rational. So, private property and its extent is the principle that gives a measure of how rational an individual is. Okay, so if you go back to the state of nature, we'll come back to this private property bit, but let's go a little back into the state of nature. Locke says, I told you, I hope you remember that everything in Locke has two stages. The state of nature has two stages. The social contract has two stages. Nothing is one stage like as it is in the case of Hobbes. Okay, So when we go back and have a look at the state of nature, Locke says in the first stage of the state of nature, there is relative equality. Okay, people live in a relatively equalitarian society, and even when you ask, how is it that people are living in harmony without there being any authority? How is society possible without authority? He basically says it is possible because of the operation of what he calls three kinds of limitations on individuals in the state of nature, in the first stage, not in the second stage. Okay, in the first stage of the state of nature, there are three limitations that are placed on an individual. And these are very moral principles. Okay, or rather, the limitations are based in morality. So, what are these three limitations? The first limitation that Locke talks about is called a spoilage limitation. One second. Hi, Shekhar. Sorry. Sorry about this. Um, so we have this thing called the spoilage limitation, which is the first limitation. The second limitation is the sufficiency limitation. And the third limitation is the labor limitation. Now, this is an assumed limitation, and it is not very clearly stated by Locke. He's a bit shrewd, so he doesn't state it very clearly. So it is considered to be an assumed limitation. And we'll go into why it is considered that. But let's not start with the private thing. I mean, the third thing, sorry. We'll start with the first limitation, spoilage limitation. In the state of nature, everything that is available is only natural. Food is natural. Either it is fruits, vegetables, or it is meat. Now, what he says is, if somebody takes more, okay, if somebody takes more than he requires, somebody takes more than he requires, then if he is not able to consume it all, then it will get spoiled. So let's put it this way. There is an apple tree and there are apples on it. Now, if I eat 2 apples, that will satiate my hunger. That's enough. It'll fill my stomach. But if I say something like, no, I want more. Okay. Suppose I say, I want more. Then the problem that comes up is that I will spoil something by not eating it. If instead of taking 2 apples which are sufficient, if I take 4 or 5 apples, I'm not able to eat them, so they'll rot. The rot will set in, which means you're spoiling the produce of nature, and you don't have a right to do that. Okay, so there is no natural right here which says you can spoil things. In fact, there is a principle which says you should not spoil things. So take only that much that you require. The second one is the sufficiency limitation, which is nothing but an extension of the spoilage limitation. How is it an extension? If 2 apples are sufficient for me to satisfy my hunger, and if I take 5, not only am I spoiling them, but I am possibly depriving somebody else who needs those apples for satiating his hunger. And I don't have a right to do that. Okay? Because everything in nature belongs to everyone equally. So I can only take that much which is sufficient. More than that, I cannot take it. If I take more than what I want, then I'm depriving somebody else of his requirement. So that is the sufficiency limitation. Now the labor limitation here is to be understood as, suppose somebody is crippled or whatever. Okay, so he can't climb a tree to take the apples. Then those who can climb the tree cannot take more apples because this man is not able to climb the tree. You can't do that. Even though you can labor, which means you can climb up, labor is taken here in a very, very generic and very broad sense. Okay, so he says, even if you can labor more than others and accumulate more, because of the spoilage and sufficiency limitations, you don't or cannot labor more and say, I want more. The third limitation, which is the labor limitation, is what gives away Locke's idea of private property and how it is accumulated. Okay, it is from this third limitation. You might ask, how are you saying that something which is a limitation, how is this an idea that gives away the idea of private property and how it is accumulated? Now you have to understand one thing. Locke has this principle, his contention. His contention was that anything in nature belonged to everyone, but, and the but is always, as you know, the most important clause. The moment somebody says but, it means that there is a clause coming in. So a clause comes in here. Everything in nature belongs to everyone. But if somebody has expended their energy or used their energy into the creation of something from nature, then that thing which has been created by that individual becomes the extension of the self, individual self. Okay, it becomes the extension of the individual self, and therefore that is the private property of that individual. So let me give you a very simple example. Clay that is there in nature. Clay is not something that belongs to anyone. Clay belongs to everyone. It's there in nature. Now, if I pick up clay, raw clay, I pick it up and make a beautiful doll out of it. What have I done? First and foremost, I have used my creativity. Okay, I have used my creativity in order to create that particular doll. Okay, that is the first thing. The second thing is not just creativity. When I am creating the doll with my hands, I am putting my energy into that clay and making a doll out of it. Through use of my energy, through the use of my hands, I am creating that. So my creativity and my use of energy in creating that doll make that doll an extension of myself, and therefore that is my property. And interestingly here, it is my property by my labor. That is what Locke is saying. Something is my property because I have labored. So when I labor, when I expend my energy into something in nature, then it becomes an extension of myself, and therefore my property. That is the private property. So people have right over clay, but they don't have right over the doll that I have created out of the clay. Now try to understand the labor limitation. Okay, now try to understand the labor limitation. Even if I can create 10 dolls, I shouldn't. Why shouldn't I? Because if I keep on creating dolls or whatever out of clay, others may need clay for some other purpose. There's not only one purpose for clay. So what he's saying is that others will not get enough clay for themselves. They will not get enough clay for themselves. So that is a labor limitation as well. Even if I can make 10 other kinds of dolls and make them my private property, the labor limitation is that which is telling me that don't do it, because then you could deprive somebody else of their clay. So even though I'm capable of doing much more, I'm not being allowed to do it because of the operation of these two other limitations. the spoilage limitation and the sufficiency limitation. These limitations are making sure that despite my ability to labor more and accumulate greater private property, I cannot do it. This principle is the actual proof of the state of nature in Locke also being an experimental state, and it also uses the method of logical abstraction. Okay, he uses a method of logical abstraction. But instead of removing something like Hobbes did, which is remove authority, what Locke is doing is abstractly introducing limitations. Okay, there is no chronological state like this where there was spoilage limitation and all that. No, there isn't. So that is also an experimental stage. Now, he says that the first stage of the state of nature, because of these limitations, the three limitations, spoilage, sufficiency, and labor, there is self-regulation. And that is the reason why life in the first stage of the state of nature is harmonious, because it is self-regulated and it is harmonious. So people are not only rational here, they are also moral. Try to understand that. Okay? Not only are they rational, they are also moral. Now, Locke says that the first stage of the state of nature breeds relative equality, but the existence of these limitations upon the individual, especially the limitation that does not allow the individual to work to his full capacity, becomes an impediment in the generation of social wealth. Okay, that is what he says. It becomes an impediment in the generation of social wealth. So, if we are looking at this, okay, if we are looking at this particular principle, now Locke is trying to tell you that why are we not unleashing our potential? Why are we satisfied with so little when we can have so much more? That is a question that Locke asks. Why? Why do we have to settle for less when we can get more? Okay. So this, he says, leads to unrest among people. It leads to unrest because you know you can do more, but you're not being allowed to do. So people start feeling restless, restive, and people start, also turning a little antisocial, because despite the fact that they can do more, if they are not allowed to do more, then you will become a challenge to society. And therefore, what they do is that they decide to overcome the first stage of the state of nature. They decide that the first stage of state of nature, despite all its good intentions, despite all those things, by putting these limitations, and especially the labor limitation, it is something that is becoming a hindrance to the generation of social wealth and a better quality of life. So they decide to move into the second stage of the state of nature and start generating more wealth. The second stage of the state of nature is also experimental. Okay, it's not just the first stage which is experimental, it is the second stage also which is experimental. Why is it experimental? It is experimental simply because Locke introduces the concept of money in the second stage of the state of nature. Okay, in a state of nature, there may be society, great, but money, the introduction of money in the second stage of the state of nature is a complete giveaway of the fact that even this is just an experimental stage. Again, logically, he's introducing abstractly, he's introducing money into it. Okay, so money gets introduced into the state of nature. Now, remember, in Lockean times, paper currency hadn't yet come into being. What was there was essentially money which was in the form of metal. Okay, I don't know, but till a few years back, just like you have a stock exchange, there was a global exchange called the London Metal Exchange, LME, which determined the value of a metal. Okay, it determined the value of a metal, any metal, right? And if you look at how the British system of money evolved, it evolved with metal and the weight of the metal. Okay, so initially it was iron ore. Okay, it was iron ore, and iron was converted into metal. So, according to the weight, a pound is a weight. Shilling, penny, all are weights. They are metal derived and weight derived. Okay, before that, there were also, before today we talk about pounds, shillings, pence, farthings. We talk about all those today, but there was also a time when people talked about ingots. Ingots were heavier than pounds. Sterling. Okay. pound sterling is purity of the metal, not just any metal, but a metal that is pure, especially if it is gold, because people moved from iron to gold pretty fast. Okay, if you read a book by this economist, Neil, Niall, Neil Ferguson, it's called The Story of Money. He says the British were so intelligent. At one time, the Spanish plundered the whole of Central America for silver. And they said silver is more valuable than iron. And therefore, they said we are a richer country. Because you have to, when you compare currencies of the country, which country is more rich? And the British, small little island, phenomenal people. They said, you want to accumulate silver? Go ahead, keep accumulating it. There's plenty of it. What is not available in plenty? Gold. So they started accumulating very silently. They accumulated gold. And when they accumulated gold, they said your metal is worthless before ours. And therefore, our currency is far superior to yours. And so I don't know if you've heard of this. You should have been taught this in economics. I hope you have been taught this in economics. Till 1969, there was a thing called gold standard. Okay. There was a gold standard. What is the gold standard? Gold standard is how much gold, what quality of gold. You have 24 carats, 22 carats, you have all those, right? So what quality of gold and how much gold did a state have? That created the value of the currency. If you had very good gold reserves, then your currency would get a high rating. It would get a high rating. Okay. That's why it was called the gold standard. And that was introduced by the British. They said those who have greater gold are the ones who will have more value attached to their currencies. Now, what happened after the Second World War? I hope you've been taught these things, rather the interwar period. I'm sorry, not the Second World War, the interwar period, starting with the Great Economic Depression of 1929, which lasted till 1937, I think. And during this particular time, the economies of the European countries were completely destroyed. They were completely destroyed. The only country that had a lot of money was was America. So what people did is, according to the Marshall Plan, the Dawes Plan, I'm sure you did all this, or I hope you did all this. people deposited their gold. Okay, the gold that belonged, not private gold holding. Private gold holding, even today, India is the highest, by the way, in the world. States gold holding. They deposited these with the Americans, and in return for that, they got foreign exchange, dollars, so that they could trade between or among nations. Okay, so they gave the gold to America. Have you heard of Fort Knox? F-O-R-T, Fort K-N-O-X, Fort Knox. It is in America. Why is it famous? It is very famous because all the gold that was pledged to the Americans in return for dollars is even today stored in the Fort Knox, the world's biggest holding of gold is there in Fort Knox in America. President Nixon, everybody says he was a horrible man, terrible chap, okay, and the Watergate scandal, all those things people point out about Nixon, his being impeached. But America should be eternally in debt to Richard Nixon, simply because of the fact that Richard Nixon said there will be no more gold standard. He said, you people don't have enough money to take that gold back. From now onwards, the value of your currency will depend upon how many dollars you have of foreign exchange for trading. And the dollar became the de jure, J-U-R-E, currency for all trading, foreign exchange trading. So if you had higher reserves of dollars, then your currency had a better value. If you had a lower quantum of dollars, then it became lesser your value. And then you have all these stock exchanges and all this that have sprung up. It's an entire economic system. This should be taught to you in economics, not in political science. If you want, I'll teach it one day when you finish your exams. If you want to know how it works, I will tell you that. Okay. So the value of a currency depends upon its dollar holdings now. So there is a joke. People say China gives all the manufactured things to the world. China is the manufacturing hub of the world. India is the service industry of the world, the back end of the world, so to speak. It provides services. China provides products. What does America give? Paper. What paper? Dollars. Today, if people say right? I have enough money now. Please give me back my gold. The Americans won't be able to give the gold back. That is the cleverness of Richard Nixon. He created the petrodollar. The petrodollar is, he realized that the most important thing that people require is petroleum, crude oil. So you have what are called bourses, bourses. Oil bourses are all traded in dollar terms. You have to pay in dollars. Only then you will get oil. If you take rupees, it is worthless. Okay, so the petrodollar has made America the economic superpower that it is. Nothing else. They don't have any great intelligence. They don't have any industrial development. You know, the Japanese and the Koreans and all make better products than the Americans make. What products does America make anyway? America is a marketing tool. That's all it is. But thanks to the petrodollar, thanks to Richard Nixon, they have become the country that is most powerful in the world. So you see that metal initially and right up to 1970 was basically the way of having money. So now in John Locke, the introduction of money leads to the removal of the three restrictions that we have seen in the first stage of the state of nature. In the second stage of the state of nature, these three limitations are removed. So the second stage of the state of nature should be understood as nothing but capitalist society. Why should it be understood as capitalist society? Let's go through this quotation. The grass that my horse bit, the turf that my servant cut, and the ore that I have dug out from somewhere in nature, any ore, iron ore, whatever ore, that I have dug out from somewhere in nature is mine by my labor. It is mine by my labor. Okay, digging I have done, it is my labor. How is the grass that the horse has bitten, how is it mine? By my labor. And how is this turf, which is also a certain kind of grass, the turf that the servant has cut, how is that by my labor? It is by his labor, isn't it? Not my labor. But Locke is saying that it is mine by my labor. So tomorrow, we finish now.